Welcome to Double Double 2 Stories by Lechish. Today's story is about a day it changed Eisenhower forever, when he saw in concentration camps. Now let me hand it over to my assistant Bob.
My name is Bob. I'm Ilya's assistant, and today I'm going to tell you about the day that changed Dwight Eisenhower forever. April 1945. The war in Europe is almost over. Allied forces are advancing across Germany. And then, Supreme Commander Eisenhower receives a report. American troops have liberated a place called Ohrdruf. It is described as a labor camp. Eisenhower has heard rumors about such places. He has read intelligence reports. But he does not fully understand what they mean, so he decides to see for himself. And what he sees on April 12, 1945, will haunt him for the rest of his life. This is the story of the day Eisenhower witnessed the Holocaust, what he said, what he did, and why his decision to document everything changed history. April 12, 1945. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, was not a man easily shocked. He had commanded the largest amphibious invasion in history at Normandy. He had overseen battles where tens of thousands of soldiers died. He had seen the destruction of cities, the horror of combat, the cost of war, but he had never seen anything like what he was about to witness. For months, Allied intelligence had been receiving reports about German concentration camps, reports of mass killings, reports of systematic murder, reports of places where human beings were worked to death, starved, tortured, and exterminated. But these reports were fragmentary, incomplete, and often so extreme that many Allied commanders found them hard to believe. How could a modern, civilized nation commit such atrocities on such a scale? Surely the reports were exaggerated. Surely they were propaganda. But as American and British forces pushed deeper into Germany in early 1945, they began liberating these camps. And the reports were not exaggerated. They were, if anything, understated. On April 4, 1945, the U.S. 89th Infantry Division liberated a small camp near the town of Ohrdruf in central Germany. Ohrdruf was a subcamp of Buchenwald, a forced labor camp where prisoners were worked to death building underground facilities for the German military. When American soldiers entered Ohrdruf, they found scenes of unimaginable horror. Bodies stacked like cordwood, emaciated prisoners barely alive, evidence of torture, starvation, and systematic murder. The soldiers who liberated Ohrdruf were hardened combat veterans. They had fought through France and Germany. They had seen death. But what they found at Ohrdruf was different. This was not war. This was something else. This was deliberate, organized mass murder. Reports of what American soldiers found at Ohrdruf quickly reached Supreme Headquarters, and Eisenhower made a decision. He would go see for himself. He would not rely on reports. He would not accept second-hand accounts. He would witness it with his own eyes, and he would bring others with him. On April 12, 1945, Eisenhower traveled to Ohrdruf. With him were two of the most senior American generals in Europe, General George Patton, commander of the Third Army, and General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group. These were not soft men. Patton was one of the most aggressive combat commanders in the U.S. Army. Bradley was a careful, methodical strategist who had overseen some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Both men had seen the worst of combat, but nothing had prepared them for Ohrdruf. When they arrived at the camp, they were met by American officers who had been there since the liberation. The officers tried to prepare them. They tried to explain what they were about to see, but words were inadequate. Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley walked through the camp. They saw the barracks where prisoners had been kept, starved, and left to die. They saw the crematorium where bodies had been burned. They saw the gallows where prisoners had been hanged. They saw piles of corpses that the SS guards had not had time to destroy before fleeing. And they saw the survivors, men who were so emaciated, so close to death, that they barely looked human. Men who stared at the American generals with hollow eyes, unable to speak, unable to believe they were finally free. General Patton, the tough, aggressive warrior who believed soldiers should never show weakness, turned away and vomited. He could not control it. The sight, the smell, the sheer horror of what he was witnessing overwhelmed him. He walked away from the group and was sick. General Bradley stood silently, his face pale, struggling to process what he was seeing. And Eisenhower forced himself to look at everything. He walked through every building. He examined every atrocity. He spoke to survivors through interpreters. He asked questions. He took notes. And he made a decision. After touring Ohrdruf, Eisenhower gathered the officers and made his position clear. "We are told that the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for," Eisenhower said. "Now, at least, he will know what he is fighting against." But Eisenhower understood something else. He understood that what he had just witnessed was so unbelievable, so extreme, that future generations might doubt it had happened. People might say the reports were exaggerated. They might claim the evidence was fabricated. They might deny the Holocaust ever occurred. And so Eisenhower gave an order: document everything, photograph everything, film everything, bring in journalists, bring in photographers, bring in members of Congress, bring in anyone who can serve as a witness. Make the record so complete, so overwhelming, that no one can ever deny what happened here. This was not just about punishing the guilty. This was about preserving the truth. Within hours, military photographers and film crews arrived at Ohrdruf. They documented every building, every mass grave, every piece of evidence. They filmed survivors giving testimony. They photographed the bodies, the crematorium, the instruments of torture. They created a visual record that could not be disputed. But Eisenhower was not finished. He also ordered that German civilians from the nearby town of Ohrdruf be brought to the camp and forced to see what had been done in their name. On April 13th, the day after Eisenhower's visit, American soldiers marched hundreds of German civilians through the camp. Men and women from the town who had lived just miles away from Ohrdruf. Many claimed they did not know what was happening in the camp. They said they had no idea. Eisenhower did not believe them, and even if they truly had not known, he believed they needed to see. They needed to witness the consequences of the regime they had supported. The German civilians walked through the same paths Eisenhower had walked. They saw the same atrocities. Many of them wept. Some fainted. Others turned away in horror. American soldiers forced them to keep looking. This was not cruelty. This was accountability. After the tour, Eisenhower ordered the mayor of Ohrdruf and his wife to view the camp. The next day, both the mayor and his wife committed suicide. They could not live with what they had seen, with what had been done. But Ohrdruf was just the beginning. In the days and weeks following Eisenhower's visit, American and British forces liberated more camps. Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. Each one revealed the same systematic horror, mass murder on an industrial scale. And at each camp, Eisenhower's orders were followed. Document everything. Photograph everything. Bring witnesses. On April 15, 1945, British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany. They found more than 60,000 prisoners, most of them starving and sick. Thousands of corpses lay unburied. Typhus was spreading through the camp. British soldiers worked for weeks to bury the dead and care for the survivors. Thousands more died even after liberation because they were too sick to save. On April 19th, Eisenhower sent a cable to General George Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff in Washington. In that message, Eisenhower described what he had witnessed at Ohrdruf. He wrote, "The things I saw beggar description. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick. I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things, if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." That last sentence revealed Eisenhower's foresight. He already understood that people in the future might try to deny the Holocaust. He already knew that evidence would be questioned, and he was determined to make the record so complete that denial would be impossible. Eisenhower also requested that members of the U.S. Congress and journalists be flown to Germany to witness the camps themselves. He wanted elected officials, opinion leaders, and the press to see with their own eyes what had been found. In late April 1945, a delegation of U.S. congressmen and senators arrived in Germany. They toured Buchenwald and other camps. They saw the gas chambers, the crematoriums, the mass graves. Many of them were shaken, some wept openly, but they all became witnesses. They returned to the United States and testified to what they had seen. Their accounts made it into the congressional record, into newspapers, into history. On April 29, 1945, American forces liberated Dachau, one of the first and most notorious Nazi concentration camps. Dachau had been in operation since 1933. More than 200,000 people had been imprisoned there. Tens of thousands had died. When American soldiers entered Dachau, they found thousands of corpses and emaciated survivors. And they also found the gas chamber, disguised as a shower room, where prisoners had been murdered. The liberation of Dachau was chaotic and violent. Some American soldiers, enraged by what they saw, killed SS guards who had surrendered. This was not official policy. It was an emotional response to overwhelming horror. But it revealed how deeply the camps affected even hardened soldiers. Eisenhower's reaction to the liberation of each camp was consistent. Document it. Preserve the evidence. Make sure the world knows. By May 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany surrendered, the Nazi regime collapsed, but the work of documenting the Holocaust continued. Eisenhower ensured that film footage, photographs, and testimony from the camps were preserved and shared widely. Newsreels showing the liberation of the camps were shown in theaters across the United States and Britain. The public saw the evidence, and they understood, perhaps for the first time, the true nature of the enemy they had been fighting. Years later, after the war, Eisenhower's decision to document the camps proved crucial. At the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi leaders were prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity, the evidence gathered at Eisenhower's orders was presented. photographs, films, and testimony from survivors were used to convict those responsible. The visual record made denial impossible, and in the decades that followed, as some people began to question whether the Holocaust had really happened, the evidence Eisenhower ordered to be collected stood as undeniable proof. The photographs are real. The films are real. The testimony is real. Eisenhower saw it. Patton saw it. Bradley saw it. Thousands of soldiers saw it. Congressmen saw it. Journalists saw it. And they documented it all. Eisenhower himself never forgot what he saw at Ohrdruf. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote about that day in detail. He described the horror, the disbelief, and the necessity of witnessing it personally. He explained why he had ordered such extensive documentation. And he made clear that he believed future generations needed to know what had happened, not as abstract history, but as documented, undeniable fact. The liberation of the Nazi concentration camps was one of the most important moments of World War II, not because it changed the military outcome of the war. The camps were liberated, as Germany was already collapsing, but because it revealed the true moral stakes of the conflict. This was not just a war between nations. It was a war against an ideology that sought to systematically exterminate entire peoples. Eisenhower understood this immediately, and he understood that without evidence, without documentation, without witnesses, the truth might be lost or distorted. So he acted. He gave the orders. He made sure the world would see. And because of his decision, the Holocaust is one of the most thoroughly documented crimes in human history. Eisenhower's foresight, his moral clarity, and his insistence on preserving the truth ensured that what happened in those camps would never be forgotten. What Eisenhower saw on April 12, 1945, changed him. It changed how he understood the war. It changed how he understood humanity. And it led him to make one of the most important decisions of his life, to ensure that the evidence of the Holocaust was preserved for all time. That decision matters today, and it will matter for as long as people study history.